we're very happy, we meaning my colleague Adrien and I, both working at CINEA, to welcome you here today. I don't know if we can have also the first slide or the cover slide, please. Thank you. So again, a very happy welcome. We're very happy to welcome you today. It's already big numbers of you, but we're also aware that not everybody could make it for this meeting, and this is why, as announced, we will record this information session. We are aware that you have been waiting quite a bit of time for our guidance, and that this exercise should have been launched at your project month 9, but we had to take some time to tailor the tool, to tailor the guidance, to decide on how we wanted to approach this exercise, and we are convinced that this was a really good investment of time, because in the end, everybody will benefit from this tailoring to the special needs of this program, to your needs, to our needs. And you will see maybe or sense that this additional effort also led to a reduction of process and data requirements. So in the end, we think we really focus on those elements that are central. Also compared to other LIFE programs. But we are very aware that this exercise has now suddenly taken up a lot of speed, and that has its reasons. If I may ask you one more thing, because there was a question from our organizers, whether you could make sure that your real name is somewhere displayed in Zoom in order to be able to track your participation as well. That would be great. So if you have a very fancy name in Zoom, maybe you change this towards your real name so that we can a bit identify you. So just to tell you what is on for today, we will have two big parts. One is more an upfront presentation with a guided tour, and the other part is more interactive. So we would first give you an introduction to the tool and the process. Then we would give a virtual tour through the tool, so a live demo from the perspective of a coordinator. And then in the last step of this upfront presentation, we would want to explain how these impacts on the LIFE-CET should be understood and reported. So, and finally, there will be quite some time, or that's at least foreseen like this, to give you the floor to ask questions. I don't know, Adrien, anything to add at this stage? No? Okay. Okay, then I would ask for the next slide, please. So, next, that was already the slide that I explained, but doesn't matter. Maybe just to mention the 2 points under the part 2. The chat is open. I mean, the chat meaning that you can type, but since we will be presenting, we will have little chance to really address your questions. So we would ask you to ideally reserve those questions for the question and answer session. But then in the question and answer sessions, you're very welcome to raise your hand, take the micro, and just ask. Now, next slide. And the next one. So this is the part where we introduce you to the process and to the tool. So what is, in general, as a background, this exercise about? I mean, some of you, or most of you, might have been already coordinators under Horizon 2020. So this is not an exercise that you know. But under LIFE, the LIFE program has established key project indicators, so not key performance, key project indicators that are meant to capture not only the environmental, climate and energy related impacts, but also the policy and socioeconomic impacts. For 2 reasons. First of all, because the KPIs would help to monitor the performance of the overall program. And actually, the exercise that we are going through will directly inform the LIFE midterm evaluation. But it will also give information about the impacts we achieve under specific sub-programs. And in that case, it would be LIFE-CET. But since there are so many projects and so many data, the KPI tool, which this session is about, was put in place because it allows us to systematically track and aggregate impacts, and this across the whole LIFE program. And you know that the LIFE program is really huge and manages thousands of projects. So a kind of tool to track these impacts was really needed. To that end also, you find in your grant agreement the obligation, so all LIFE grant agreements have a requirement for the consortia to report on their impacts. Next slide, please. So the LIFE-CET impacts, which are these? And one thing we really want to stress, we do have this KPI, these LIFE KPIs, but we also have these other ones. And we have these topic-specific indicators that you find established under each topic in the call for proposals. We do have the project-specific indicators, or some of you have, because we encourage you to find whatever indicators that would best express the impact of your project. It's not mandatory, but you can have them. And then there's this last set of indicators, the LIFE-CET program indicators, that are today's subject. To make it very clear, the topic-specific indicators are still, in our view, in most of the cases, those indicators that are most meaningful and can best reflect the specific impact of your project. So don't forget about those. And by no means this specific exercise that we're going through today should lead to less ambition to measure and document the topic-specific impacts. That said, there is this exercise, and we need to report on the LIFE-CET indicators that in many cases are complementary, but in some parts are also maybe additional. And the basis of them, or the indicators, are those that you find in Part C. So normally, because it's a part of your grant agreement and it was part of the application phase, the proposal phase, you should have already, to some degree, have addressed them at application stage and gap phase. So you should, it cannot be completely new for you. And the data that you at the time being included in Part C, and that has been probably also reviewed during the gap phase, that was automatically extracted from eGrants, so from our project management tool, and transferred into the tool. So it's there. It's what you find if you enter the tool. And this data is your starting point. Next slide, please. So the tool is, let's say, semi-straightforward. Kind of straightforward. It's a bit complex, but not so complex in the end, but it still requires quite a bit of guidance, also because the tool was really tailor-made, or this part was tailored to LIFE-CET. So also we needed LIFE-CET specific guidance. And you have received the guidance document in an email, and that guidance addresses the structure of the tool and the process, but also the parameters against which you will report. And finally, it gives a bit more of overall methodology on how to understand, calculate, and report on the 11 LIFE-CET indicators. The guidance document that you received is mirrored also inside the tool. So you will find little buttons like the ones that you see on the slide that say Open Guide. Still, because in the tool it's a bit scattered across the sections, recommend really, at least when you start, to use the standalone document, because there you have the real thread and you have everything together and not distributed across different parts. Next slide, please.
Okay. And
now I already hand over, yes.
Yeah. Hi, everybody from my side also. So I'm going to give you a bit of information on the process and how to deal with the tool. The first thing is to understand is what's the general process. So there are several stages for the data. Basically, we're talking about data on the impact of your project. The first stage is that the data is imported from Part C. When you applied and when you did the gap process, you have data in Part C in most of the indicators. And so we import this data into the tool. And then the data will appear as open. That's the status of your data. And then as coordinator, you fill in the data and you submit it, and that's called verified. So that means you have checked and verified the data on the impact of your project. And then we, as project advisors and the colleagues, will check the data. And note here that for those of you who are also in the other LIFE-CET programs, here we don't have a technical monitor doing this work before the project advisor, so it goes directly to the project advisors. And so the colleagues and ourselves will check the data on your project. And if it's okay, then it will appear as validated, and hopefully that will be the case. If not okay, it will appear under the status verification rejected, which means you need to resubmit it. And once the data is validated, it's frozen, and then it will constitute what's called a data snapshot on your, meaning at this very moment, at month 9, for example, or more likely in April, you will have we have a snapshot of what is the expected impact from your project. Next slide, please. Okay, so with this in mind, what do we expect you to do? In the end, this might sound very scary. I can agree to that. It's not that complicated. There's really 3 steps. The first thing you're going to have to do is to make the data structure more granular. And here we're going to add 2 dimensions. The first one is called context, and here for LIFE-CET, it's simply the geographic location of your activities. And for CET projects, we really recommend to stick to the national level, unless you have a very good reason, but it's going to involve much more complexity if you go to the regional or very local level. So just stick to the national level. And then the other dimension is what we've called descriptors. And this is for the first 5 KPIs. We have basically, we're asking you to break down your impact in terms of investments, energy savings, greenhouse gas reductions, renewable energy generation by economic sector. And so there's a nomenclature which you have probably seen in the guidance, but it goes by buildings, industry, transport, others, and so on. So we're going to ask you to break it down, and usually most projects will not be dealing with 10 different economic sectors, or at least not in a significant manner. But the idea here is that we're able to grasp a bit more granularity on what the impacts of your project are. Once you've done that, so you've basically expanded the structure, we're going to ask you to revise and potentially refine your initial impact estimations. I mean, we've all been writing proposals, and we know that this is not exactly reflecting the reality. And the idea is that after a few months into your project, you should be able already to give a better estimation. So, for example, some of the initial assumptions were not exact and you want to change them, or maybe you don't. But so we ask you to basically refine it. It could be also revising them based on the country, because if you're targeting several countries, you're not necessarily going to do the same types of interventions. The baselines might be different if you have a pilot site in one place and in another place, because they're simply different. So it's basically refining your initial impact estimations and updating the data based on location, economic sector, and new assumptions. And the third step will be about basically providing us with the data, and we ask you to provide it in 2 ways. The first one is in a separate report that will basically include your explanation, and I'll expand a bit into that at the end of the presentation. And the second one will be in the KPI tool. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to give you a first hint at the KPI web tool. I mean, I assume a number of you will already have been there, either in previous live projects or since we sent you this email calling for this meeting. So access is through the link that's here. To be honest, if you have technical problems in accessing or navigating the database, first refer to the guidance, because that should give you a lot of the information needed. And as you will have seen, there's a lot of information in the guidance, which is basically referring to more extensive guidance with videos that are available online. So only once you have exhausted those resources, please contact the help desk. We won't want them either to be overwhelmed by questions. But in principle, hopefully the tool should be functioning correctly. There's a good news which we got yesterday or the day before, which is that as you have seen, the access to the KPI tool is only given to the person who's recorded as primary coordinator contact in eGrants, so in the portal. But since 2 days, basically, you're now able to request access for other people through something which is called the Smart Access Wizard. And there's even now a guidance on the Smart Access Wizard, which is available on the live web pages and at the link below. Can we go to the next slide? So this is basically the welcome page, and as you can see, as a beneficiary, in principle, you only have 2 tabs that you can access, and one of them is brand new. It's the Smart Access Wizard, and this is how you can give access to one of your colleagues if one of your colleagues or somebody in the consortium is going to be tasked with inputting all the data and dealing with the KPI web tool. I'm going to share my screen now and quickly show you a bit how you can navigate this famous KPI web tool. Okay, here we go. Can you see my screen correctly, more or less? Yeah. Okay, so when you come to this first page, basically you will click Go to Projects. And since the colleagues know that I'm not very experienced, they've only given me access to a test project, which hopefully should be functioning as well as yours. So you click on Project Details, and that takes you to the first page, which is where you see the different people, so that information should be filled in. And then you can see the users who are given access to this project, and this you can update with the Smart Access Wizard. The first thing you want to do is to look at the contexts. And so you will find what is important. So overarching context is not something you really need to deal with. What you need to deal with will be the specific context for your project. And so here, this is a test project, but we've said that this is a project that has 3 partners from Netherlands, Poland, and Belgium. And as you can see, the tool automatically creates 3 different contexts. That means locations where you can record impacts. The first one is the Netherlands, second one Poland, third is Belgium, and the fourth is partner countries. That means it's an aggregate of all 3. Now the tool is not going to aggregate the data of Netherlands, Poland, and Belgium into the 4th one, but if you're not able to distinguish the data, it will first, you can allocate it to this compound context. And here, I've also created one additional context, assuming that this project also has activities in Germany, because they are doing a lot of trainings and workshops in Germany, and that may lead to impact. If I want to edit, or if I want to add a new specific context, it's rather simple. You give it a name, and you select, for example, if you want to say that this context is about Hungary, select, and then we're going to see a new context for test Hungary. When I save, if things work well, it appears here. So now I have my core contexts, so Netherlands, Poland, and Belgium, plus all three undistinguished. And I'm able to go and capture the impact of my project. So here you click in indicator values. And for example, you want to fill in the data on energy savings, which I've already filled in. But as you can see, you can first put the data for Belgium. So if you go into edit, you can first fill in the total impact for Belgium and then split it under the different descriptors. Now you have to make sure that the total impact here is equal to the sum of all the descriptors. Now, in order to simplify this, I've assumed that this project is just building with residential renovation, so it makes it quite easy. It's 1 gigawatt hour per year, which we assume will be the impact of this project at the end of the project. And because there's going to be some more impacts in the next 5 years, because things are going to continue to expand, we estimate that thanks to this project, 5 years after the end of the project, 2 gigawatt hours per year will be saved in residential buildings and all together in Belgium. Okay, so once this is done, you basically click save and you're done. And then you do the next thing, the same thing for Poland. And as you can see, the impacts are all the same. And you do the same thing for the Netherlands. And then if you want to add data on Germany or Hungary, you need to go here and select a specific context and say, well, my German activities are also going to deliver 1 gigawatt hour and 2 gigawatt hours per year at the end of the project and 5 years beyond. And here again, you save, or here we're not gonna do it, but this is how you're basically adding your impacts. Okay, so keep in mind that although this page looks very long, most of your project will only be addressing 1 or 2 sectors here, so you don't need to have you don't need to fill in too many values.
Can I,
yes, please.
Yeah. No, just to say that as Ariane explained, you have automatically all the partner countries created in the overarching context and the compound, so the whole thing. So, but it might be that you have impacts in countries that are not included there. In that case, it's exactly as Ariane said. You could add other context. We encourage you, because you could also add different layers below the national level. We encourage you, and you see that in the guidance, not to go under the national level. I mean, if you absolutely want to do it, we cannot really prevent you from doing that. But our recommendation is let's phrase it like this: it doesn't need to be your ambition to go really to the most local level. So national level is perfectly fine. Also, if we know that you have local projects or local activities, but still they would be accounted to a national context.
Okay, and then I'm going to stop sharing, and Uli, you can take over with the rest of the slides. Next. Uli, you're muted.
Okay. Something looks different than beforehand, but okay. No, I just wanted to say, Ariane, don't relax yet, because I have slides at this towards the end again. Yeah. So thanks a lot. So you now got an overview of the process, but also about all the functionalities through which Adrian guided you. And now we would like to explain a little bit more the indicators, but also the impacts, how we would like them to be understood. So just to say again that all 11 LIFE-CET indicators are per se mandatory. So you cannot submit the data without a value. But before you get a heart attack now, the good news is that you can also include a zero. But be cautious about this, because we would expect a priori all projects to report on the KPIs 1 to 5. So KPIs 1 to 5 are the key indicators like primary, final energy savings, renewables generation, greenhouse gas reduction, and investments. So on those core KPIs, we expect a priori all projects to report. If you include a conscious zero, and I want to underline this conscious, for us, that would mean that your project does not have any impact on those. So why we would understand that a project either achieves energy savings or restoration, it would be very unusual to find out that a project would report zero impact both on energy savings and on renewable energy, because LIFE-CET classically is genuinely about energy savings and restoration. So we would advise not to do this. If you intend to do this, you should probably discuss it with your project advisor, but we wouldn't, this would be really an unusual case. We think that your project should either have energy saving impact or renewables, or ideally both. The same, of course, then also for greenhouse gas reduction that are directly linked to those. We do, of course, understand that there are some projects, for example, I don't know, technical support for policy design or skills projects that might face more problems to quantify these kind of impacts. But still, we would expect you to make an effort and to anyway estimate your project's impact also on those indicators. If you don't manage to do it bottom up, then top down, but Adrien is going to explain that a bit. However, for the KPIs 6 to 10, it says 6 to 10, but it should be saying 6 to 11. You might decide not to report on all of these. These are employment and communication, and these are kind of thing. And you can include a zero for all those indicators for which you think they are not relevant for your project. Next slide, please. So now about the time frame. You have to encode values at this stage, which is the first snapshots, for 2 periods of times. First of all, for the end of the project. So, I mean, nothing has changed. It's still the end of the project, only that you have progressed a little bit in your project, so you can better estimate and refine those impacts. And for the 5 years after the end of the project. What you don't need to do, what is not being asked, is that you estimate the impacts that have been achieved so far. This is not everything, and you will be able to better also determine the impacts to be achieved by the end of the project. It says my internet connection is unstable. I hope you hear me anyway. However, be careful in one regard, because the KPIs 1 to 4 are quantified on a yearly basis. So typically gigawatt hours saved per year. So they cannot be accumulated. While for the KPIs 5 to 11, they are cumulative. This means that when you would typically give the energy savings and restoration in the latest year, because we would assume that they are biggest in the latest year of your project for the value on project end. And for those KPIs that are cumulative, you would just add them up and report them. So next slide, please. Now this is the big methodological part. Let's look together at the question, what impacts can we consider and report under LIFE-CET? And impacts can be achieved or triggered in very different ways. So we have, and this is probably the most straightforward case, impacts that are being directly achieved. So meaning impacts that accrue during the project duration and inside the immediate scope of the project. So these we would call here directly achieved by a project. then we have the second case where impacts don't accrue, so don't materialize inside the project duration, but which have been triggered inside the project duration, or where the investment decision has been decided within the project duration. So these would be impacts that are directly triggered by the project. But then we also have a third category of impacts that accrue because of the activity, or because the activity is replicated, but not inside the project or the immediate project scope, but outside the immediate scope and outside the immediate target areas. So that would be replication. But all these three impacts are relevant on the LIFE-CET, and they should also be reported together, depending on the time frame for the project end value or the 5 years beyond value. Note also that we are very well aware that impacts don't have to be exclusively be a result of that project activity, and that other factors can contribute to the impacts that your project accrue. However, what is important is that there is a link between the project activities and the impacts that you want to report. So next slide, please. Yeah, this is the famous table that should be systematic and help you. So you find that also in the standalone guidance document. This table is just summarizing what we just explained. It's supposed to give you an overview of the impact types or impact categories, as you want to call it, and differentiate, so achieved versus triggered, direct versus indirect, and then in the columns for the different time frames. So end value beyond 5 years value. I think this is the table is quite self-explanatory. Just to emphasize again that this categorization is not meant to make you report on them separately. So as I said earlier, that you would report them in one figure. The directly achieved impacts, directly triggered impacts, and the indirect impacts is just to explain what kind of impacts could be components of your impact value. But we also know that this is quite theoretical. So to make it more tangible, we would now give you a couple of concrete examples. And that would be on the next slide. So first example, we have 3, and we have even more afterwards. So for example, a project sets up a campaign to exchange 1,000 inefficient heaters in energy poor households. So we would first of all have energy savings that start to accrue, for example, in the second half of the project, and these would be considered impacts achieved during the project end, really achieved. But these heaters continue to be installed after the project end, but the investment decision has been taken before. These would then be considered impacts triggered until the project end. Still the same impact value. Eh? Now, after the project end, the 1,000 heaters continue to save energy, and some more heaters are deployed. The annual saving in the typically in the 5th year, could also go for the 4th year, but typically in the 5th year, because you would expect them there to be biggest, after the project end would be reported under the beyond 5 years value. So the first 2 impacts bullets that you see would be reported on the project for the project end. And the third one would be for the beyond 5 years value. This is to make the distinction between achieved and triggered, but also the bold in tells you it's not cumulative. It's a figure that accrues in 1 year. So the next example is on the next slide, please. So the second example is a project establishes energy contracting schemes for 5 public authorities that will be commissioned and implemented within 2 years following the project end. So the impact doesn't accrue during the project, but it is triggered inside the project duration, so that it would still be reported as a project end value. However, then the next aspect is that the project has put in place a project development unit, which will facilitate additional investments afterwards. And the impact of the initial and additional investments should be accumulated and reported under the beyond 5 years value. Here we wanted to emphasize that for investments, you would you would accumulate all the investments that are being made as from the project start, well, until the project end, and then again until the beyond 5 years. So now third example. A project provides 7 local authorities with a model that helps them establish their SECAPs. The model is validated in those 7 local authorities within the project, but at the same time, outside those 7 local authorities, others start already using this model as well. So the impacts are certainly achieved inside the project scope and during project duration, but here the case is that impacts are also being triggered outside the immediate project scope. And depending on the time frame, you would also report these indirect impacts together with the other impacts that accrue for the project. So here we want to highlight the inside outside project scope. Just to remind you again, all these impacts are relevant LIFE-CET impacts and can be reported. Important is that there's a link, that you can really explain why this is not direct result, but why it's somehow linked to the project activities. And I think that was for me it. Let me see next slide. I think it's with Adrien.
Thanks, Uli. So now, as we said already, I mean, there are several ways and probably 100,000 ways to calculate your impact in the CET project, but roughly there are 2 main methods. And the one we'd like you to use by default, and that would be for a very vast majority of your project, is bottom-up. And here, I mean, I'm just showing quite a simplified example, but if you're looking at building renovation, which quite a number of projects do, but also if you're targeting other types of activities, you would start by estimating what is the average energy consumption of the buildings you're targeting and their average surface. And then you use the estimated percentage of savings that you can deliver with your project, whether it's through changing behavior or through investments. And you put in the number of renovation, and that should give you the final energy savings per year. And you'll notice that the plus here is not a mathematical plus. It's just putting into your basket all the different elements that you need for your calculations. Very important mention here. Renewable energy production is not considered as energy savings. You might have a reduction of your energy consumption, of your net energy consumption, but it's not energy efficiency and it's not energy savings either. Once you have basically an estimation of your final energy savings, you would, for a number of projects, count in the share of electricity that is in the savings and factor in the primary energy factor in order to obtain the primary energy savings. And then you add in the CO2 intensity of the different energy carriers that are involved in the buildings that you are targeting, and that will allow you to calculate the greenhouse gas reduction. And you put in the average cost of renovation of the investments, and that will allow you to have an estimation of your total investment. You would then split renovation between, for example, residential and public buildings if you're targeting both sectors at the same time, and that allows you to split to have the figure for the 2 descriptors. And then you have a split of renovation per country. And maybe you do this split per country upfront because your assumptions will be different per country, or maybe you do it at the very end. That will depend on what data is available at the time that you're filling in. But this is a basic illustration, and I think it should be rather clear to most of you of what we mean by a bottom-up calculation. You basically look at each individual measure and you add them progressively to get to an estimation of the total impact that can then be split between countries and between different economic sectors. Next slide. Now, if you're not able to do that, and there are very few cases, but there are some, then you will be basically using a top-down calculation, which means you're going to be using ratios which are not necessarily exactly correlated to your activities, but they're an approximation of the impact that you would expect to be replicated. Typically, if your project is about investments in renewables, we ask you to estimate job creation. That's true not just for investment in renewables. Remodeling the exact job creation for your project might be very complicated because there's a lot of assumptions behind it, and there's a lot of fuzzy of gray zones for those assumptions. So probably the best way to do this is to use ratios that are recognized in this sector, and they can be recognized in your country, for example. They might be different from country to country. They might be different depending on the type of renewables. So basically, well, just look what makes more sense, and then it's about explaining why you're using that ratio. Next slide. Now, why are we talking about these methods for calculating your impact? Is because ultimately we don't ask you just to give us raw data on the total the gigawatt hours saved per year, but is also to explain what's behind it so that we can have a discussion and check that the data that we're reporting is credible. The reason why we're doing this verification process ultimately is that we're aggregating data and reporting on what the impact of the program is, and we need to be sure that what we're saying is not completely crazy compared to the way that another project would be evaluating and the way that another program would be reporting their impact. So what we're asking you here is basically to capture in one document all the assumptions that you've used to calculate your impact. So, I mean, don't be afraid. Also, in principle, the impact section of your proposal is a good starting base. In some cases, it will actually be sufficient to copy paste it here. Probably you will need to make some adjustments and usually splitting per country, but simply maybe refining your initial assumptions. So basically use the guidance that we've provided to check what you had in your proposal and what's in your in part B of your grant agreement. Now, what's important here is this is not a scientific discussion paper. So please don't provide 2 pages of discussions on why you're using this and that primary energy conversion factor. This is really not what the report is about. It's more, the focus that we explain is basically we want you to explain what are the operational assumptions that you're using based on the concrete experience of the project. And as I said, the feedback from reality makes that you may need to update your initial assumptions. Please make it legible and clear. I mean, that should be a given, but like for any report, especially those that you address to your project advisor. But please, I mean, we don't need to have more than 1 page per KPI, and this would really be a maximum. In many cases, it could be even less. In practice, as you've seen from the examples above, KPIs 1 to 5, so energy, renewable energy savings, renewable energy generation, greenhouse gas savings and investments will tend to be addressed together because they are very much linked. So it's okay also not to repeat the same thing in 5 different places. Just put them all together, but please, again, no more than 2 pages to explain what's behind this. And then another thing, please just produce a synthetic table with the data that you can see an example on the next slide, please. Because ultimately, if you have a project that's dealing with 6 countries and 2 sectors, so for example, public buildings and street lighting, this is the data that you will need to produce for primary energy savings for the 6 countries and the 2 sectors. Final, so 1 to 5, as you can see, needs to be split, but then the rest, there's no descriptor. So we'll ask you to provide how many pieces of legislation and policy you think you're going to change in each country. And of course, this is an estimate. If it's at month 9, well, we don't make any change compared to the whole to the initial idea of the project, and we still think that we're going to deliver 3 changes, so we're not able to locate them. And so then you would have one more context, which is the EU, the partner countries, and you just record 3 pieces of legislation changing in the partner countries, but not necessarily splitting them. But ultimately, this is the data, and this is a level of granularity that you should be providing. Most of the cases, you would have provided aggregated data, so only one column of the data, but some of the projects already have this split per country. But so the exercise is pretty much about revising what you had initially envisaged and putting it in a more complicated form in a simplified Excel file, which you can put in the Word document, and then into the tool. And this will be it for the moment. So yeah, we're done with the presentation.
We are done. I'm just trying to reply to one last thing, and this just leaves me. Maybe we didn't mention. Maybe you did. I'm not sure. But I know that Adrian mentioned that we don't have technical monitors that will take over this exercise from the CNEA side, but it will be us. So it's your project advisor that would look at your calculations. I just come back because the question was there whether it needs to be explained why the numbers are changed towards the initial ones. I mean, I think not necessarily. I mean, if it's completely different, then your project advisor, who will receive all this information, might want to ask. You might just write him an email, or her.
Well, you might just, I mean, you're going to write a report, so you can add 3 lines and say, well, we have changed the approach for this reason. Just put it there. Shall we take...
I mean, yes. I just sent this comment. I'm sorry. What did I want to say? I don't know what I want to say. But yeah, I mean, this exercise, of course, it's an additional thing that, well, it's not so additional because it's foreseen in your grant agreement. It's just now coming a bit abruptly, but in the end, we also think that you have thought about the impact at application stage, but we know that that was in a rush and you were writing a proposal, and also the gap is a rush. So we would not be surprised if the assumption figures change. We would not be surprised at all. And the more effort you make to give us a real good assumption, the more it's appreciated. So don't worry to change figures. Huh? It's not that is not the sense of the action. But just to tell you also that these figures are important because they're. It was mentioned, I think, the first slide. These figures are going to inform the midterm evaluation of the LIFE program. So in that sense, it's not useless. It's important data. And we thank you already in advance for taking the time to have a look. We think also it looks worse than it is. In the end, it's as Adrian has explained very well. In the end, it just looks big, but it's not such an effort. Yeah, and I want to thank you for your attention. But now the floor would be yours.
We have one question when we have one hand from Sofia Corsi.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for this presentation. We were really looking forward to receiving the, and we have been waiting for it for some months now. But my concern is that when looking at, well, on the one hand, is that last week we tried to connect to it as coordinator of LIFE-CET project, and our account was actually not enabled. to fill in the data. So I wonder if this issue is fixed. I'm actually not the primary contact. I'm one of the two coordinators of the project, but I'm not one of the primary contacts. So at present, I can't even access it. And my other colleague, who is the coordinator, is on holiday. So I actually need to wait for it to be able to access it. And on the other hand, my concern is that you set a very close deadline that is in less than 2 weeks, and today is the first time that you're presenting it. And many of us have to also submit an interim report by March. So there are a lot of crushing and overlapping deadlines, and I wonder if the deadline of the 5th of March is flexible. Because it does.
I'm sorry to say, no, it's not flexible. It's maybe very to a very limited extent flexible. So if it's a question of 1 or 2 days because somebody's on holidays, it might be flexible, but it's not very flexible because we need the data for this midterm evaluation. That is one of the reasons. And it's true, you have been waiting for this, but we tried to also explain that we took the time to really reduce the data requirements. I mean, I don't know if anybody had the chance to look at all these modules that are being recorded for the whole LIFE program. We really try to reduce the exercise to minimum, so that you don't have to encode too much data. But we would like to ask you to stick to this 5 or 6 March, maybe, or 7 even. And maybe also just contact your project advisor about it, because that will be the person who has to look at your data. Of course, the better your data is, and the more consistent, the easier it is for us to validate it. For the access, yeah, I don't know. We have to see whether there's a way how we can make you access it, because I think indeed the primary coordinator would need to ask access for you, and if that person is not available, is a bit. But you could also of course do the calculations outside the tool already, and you just then.
I mean, as I said, a lot of this is already in your grant agreement. So, you know, some people will go and do a full research paper on it, but this is not what we want. What we want is just an update that captures what your assumptions were, which you should have already in the impact section of your grant agreement, and putting that into the tool.
Yes, thank you. Of course, we already have some of the calculations, and we're also drafting the interim report, so we have also an update. It's just that as you presented it, if we have to write more than 1 page for each of the KPIs, it will.
A maximum doesn't need we expect 1 page.
Yeah, still.
As I said, 2 pages for KPIs 1 and 5. If your project is very much about triggering investments and so on, that that might make sense. The rest of them, how many policies we're going to change in 6 countries. Well, I mean, it doesn't take 1 page to explain that, right?
No, probably not. Okay, we'll do the best that we can. Thank you.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions?
In the chat, there's a question. It's not even so the whole EU. Yeah, I seem to remember there was also a specific context that would cover the whole EU. I think I would make would make a decision if it's really super important the EU level, and that you really accrue your impacts at EU level, then make the effort to create a context that would cover all the countries. I don't think you would need to add all the countries. But let us check this. Or Adrian, would you know? I thought there was also EU context that one could choose in the overarching context. But let me check that.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is a possibility at the moment. You would have to create it yourself, which is a bit cumbersome because you need to click 27 times to add all EU countries and create 1 new context, which will probably take you about 7.5 minutes. It's still feasible.
Well, or you concentrate really on those countries where you have most of these dissemination communication activities. Something in between, or you go for the whole thing, but maybe we can discuss it also with our IT people if there's an option to have something like that in the future.
But again, if this is, I'm looking at Erwin's question. If you haven't really defined, I mean, if you don't know and you think there may be additional impacts and so on, I mean, this is the interim. I mean, this is 9 months or a few more months into your project. You can still update that at the end of the project, and there you will have real data about those additional countries. So it's also okay, you still get a chance to update that later. Okay, any more questions?
Yeah, there's one more.
Yeah.
By Ms. Bagina. Yes, this is only LIFE-CET program indicators. For the project specific, you should just report it within your normal interim and interim reports or final report. Yes, indeed. And keep the balance. I mean, it's as Adrien said, it's not a scientific exercise. Of course, we want to encourage you to make an effort, that we can work with the figures. It will be good for your project. It will be good for the program. But of course, I mean, don't make it a huge scientific exercise, because we are aware you have also these other reporting requirements that are minimum equally important. I would say rather more important than this one.
You have Georg also?
Hi, thank you. My question is, I'm one of the coordinator who will finish this project right with the end of March. So I don't know if I'm now here in the right group. So we are just online to finish. And one thing is, I haven't received the guidance document and the KPI tool link. This is one of the things. So maybe you can send these 2 things again. This would be great. I don't know why. I just haven't received it. And the second question is, we are working on a strategic roadmap for Austria. So of this point of view, all of our project is an assumption with things that will be done. So if I understood you right, I will now put in here, let's say, energy savings beyond 5 years or something like this. And we don't have any energy savings or something like this with the end of the project, because we just delivered a strategic roadmap for the future, which will be implemented after the end of the project. So my question is now here, am I right that I put these numbers on beyond 5 years or not?
Yeah, it's a borderline case, because I mean, if it was an investment and you had triggered and it only came afterwards, it would be clearly to be reported even for the project end. If you have a roadmap and the activity to implement that roadmap only starts after the project end, is a bit borderline. I don't know, Adrien, what would you say?
I would tend to consider that it's the project activities that deliver. I mean, the project has delivered a roadmap, and the roadmap you expect will deliver, for example, investments. That for me is a result of your project activities. So you report those impacts as triggered during the time of the project.
Okay, because it's a roadmap till 2030. It's about further education. So till 2030, there will be investments in further education, and this investment in further education will trigger for sure energy savings. But this energy savings can implement, let's say, maybe in 2030 or maybe in 2035. So if it comes to this point, it's a little bit difficult for me. For sure, we have a calculation during our negotiation and during our proposal writing, but this is a calculation of energy savings, which will come because we do further education in the building sector till 2030. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. And this is nothing that will for sure happen till the end of our project, will be in 1 month. So from my point of view, I don't want to put here wrong numbers, because this is something, so I can
that will still be the result of your project. That will still be the impact of your project, even though it's not the direct impact of your activities until the end of the month. But it's still the result of your project. So I think what you've discussed in the grant agreement preparation would still be fine.
It should be valuable, and I will put it at the end of the project. As
Yeah.
okay.
I mean,
fine with
there's
this.
no clear cut, and we are very well aware that these impacts or these indicators don't fit always very well the type of activities we support. We are very aware of this.
Okay.
But still we cannot say our project doesn't have our program doesn't have an impact on energy savings, because we cannot really link it to one specific product or whatever. So this is the way we have to tackle it, and we do have these impacts, and so this is how we should try to. In German, it would be Annäherung, no, to at least get some capture them in one way. And this also now, of course, coming back to all the other questions that come up. We are very well aware that you cannot really measure the impact of skills, but we think there are ways, and also there are, for example, studies. You could also take a study and make this is the top-down methodology. So wherever you can't do it bottom-up, try to see whether there's studies that would give benchmarks for effects of skills, or I don't know, educational or policy design measures. This is the only way that we can say. Find a way, be creative, find a way.
But that's no problem. That's also not the question. My question was just in which
no, that was not your question, but it was. It was not your question, but it was all the other questions that popped up now while you were speaking. Sorry, Georg, that wasn't clear.
Perfect. No problem. Thank you.
There's definitely a challenge of attribution. Is really, where do you stop the causality chain? And this is something that also we'll try to address probably by groups of projects. Typically the Build Up Skills project, we want to have the same approach because you could take it very far, but ultimately we have to have something which is reasonable and comparable. So we don't have the direct answer, but discuss it also with your project advisor, and we'll come back to you on this.
But from my point of view, I'm absolutely fine with this. I just will put the numbers at the end of the project right now, as you told me. And if it should be another way around, then the project advisor will come.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot.
Anke?
Yes, hi. And thank you for the presentation. Sorry, I can't put on my camera. Yes, I can. I had a clarifying question about the specific context again, because you said that the specific contexts are imported automatically according to the beneficiaries' partner countries where they come from. Well, as you know, I coordinate the European City facilities, so we are targeting all of Europe and all countries. So that means I will need to add specific contexts for each country.
Yeah.
So I'm able to insert new specific context. That's what you mentioned. If I look at the tool, they're all. Can I rename them as well? The name? It seems for me very complex, these specific context. I don't really grasp.
You have to add them in the overarching one.
Just call them countries, and that will make it easier, maybe.
Okay, so I'm allowed to change the title. Okay.
Yeah,
that wasn't very clear to me.
You should be able to call them Hungary, Poland, and Netherlands.
Okay. All right.
But you can. I think you have to define them first in the overarching, and then they come. Then you can select them and rename them or not.
Okay. Okay.
Follow the detailed guidance. That should tell you sufficiently.
Okay, thank you.
It's going to be more challenging for the city facility than for other projects, I think.
I feel so.
Sorry.
All right. I'll come back to you. All right.
There are more. I don't see anything in the chat.
Well, I guess there will be much more questions coming once people start working on it. But well, for the moment, I think that's already a first introduction. I hope it was sufficiently comprehensive and helped to make it seem a bit less complicated than it might have seemed. And
okay, then I would say we close the meeting. And as we said, but it doesn't necessarily refer to you because you have been in the meeting, but for those that have not been in the meeting, it will be recorded and we'll make it available. And let's see whether we can make we can send the guidance document to Georg, and who for some reason didn't get it. Okay.
Would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck, everyone. Well, if you have technical issues, help desk.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then
Thank you.
if you have more questions, please contact
Thank you.
the advisor.
You will.
One quick question.
Yes,
Just one
go.
quick. Thank you. There's a section, comment section below each KPI. Should we write something there or no? Nothing. Okay. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Goodbye then.
Bye.
And thanks again
Bye.
for attending. Bye.